Is it arrogant to believe that Christianity is the only true religion or the only way to salvation? It's a really good question. We live in a culture that really confuses the idea of truth. And some people believe that your truth can be your truth and my truth is my truth. But the problem with that is one of our truths may or may not be correct. Let me put it this way. If I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and he is the only way to have a relationship with God and he is my salvation when I die, and you believe that your neighbor Steve is the only way to salvation and he is going to save you when you die, only one of us is going to be correct. And we're not going to know until we die. And so I think this is a very valuable conversation to have. You see, in our culture, we struggle, people struggle with really believing whether the Bible is true or not. There's a section in John chapter 9 where Jesus heals a blind man, and the blind man goes to his religious leaders, and they don't believe him. And so they go to his family, and they ask his family, was he really blind? And they say, yes, he was blind. And yet they still don't believe who Jesus is. And at the end of that story, the blind man puts his faith in Jesus as his Savior. You see, just because people don't believe something or because something seems unbelievable doesn't make it any less true. But we've also got to be careful that we don't come across as thinking that we know more than other people. It's okay that we don't have all the answers. In fact, we're all on a journey trying to figure out what is truth. So here's the thing. When it comes to being arrogant, when it comes to being confident, there's a fine line. Arrogant, it's all about me, what I know, what I believe, that I'm better than you. But confidence comes from a simple question. Who are you putting or what are you putting your trust in? You see, if it's in your neighbor or if it's in something else, you might be believing something that isn't true. But what we see in the Bible is that following Jesus and trusting in him, that is the one true faith that we can believe in. The other thing that we need to think about is that Jesus kind of counteracted some of that arrogance. If we're a Christian, if we're an individual, to avoid that arrogance, we need to serve others. Serving others removes us from looking arrogant and shows that we have confidence in who Jesus is, that we're putting our trust in him. If you have more questions, we'd love to answer them. You can contact us, send us an email at info@arcadechurch.com, and we'd love to answer those questions for you.
Good morning, church. Today's scripture reading will be from Acts chapters 27, verses 13 to 20. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along creek close to shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cutter, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supporters to undergird the ship. Then, facing that they would run aground on citrus, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small attempts lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. This is the word of God.
All right, we are currently in Acts 27, and we're at the very end of the book, just about. We're going to finish it on Palm Sunday, and it's been a great journey. It's been a wonderful time of seeing how the gospel has gone out unhindered. And Acts has been about that. It's been primarily about these two things. It's the gospel taking root with power in the known world at that time. And it kind of catalogs a series of events that span 15 to 25 years or more going into the early church, the life of the early church. But it also catalogs all of the possible hindrances that could keep the gospel from going out. Persecution, martyrdom, internal struggles, demon possession, rioting, commerce, all kinds of ways that the gospel could be hindered from going out. And Luke, the author, he catalogs all of these things and says every one of these things could be a hindrance to any movement at all, but they were not to the gospel, because Jesus is the one who said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail. He also said, I want you to go out with power, and I want you to go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and on the uttermost parts of the earth with this gospel. And so what we come to in chapter 27 is a strange story. It's strange only because there aren't any sermons preached. There's no mention of Jesus. There's no gospel resonating throughout the story. It's an adventure. That's all it is. And it causes us to pause and say, Luke, why is this story here? Now, we're going to work through it. We're just going to read the whole story, okay? So be patient. We're going to read through the whole story so we can get it, because it reads really, really quick, and it's very interesting as we go through it, okay? We'll begin at verse 1. If you remember from last Sunday, chapter 26, Paul met before Festus and Herod, and they're saying there is nothing wrong legally with this guy. He might be a little loony, but there's nothing wrong with him. And so he doesn't need to go to Caesar, but he's appealed to Caesar, so he needs to go to Rome because he has that right. So now we pick up in chapter 27, where Paul now is launching on to Rome, verse 1. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. Now the word "we" there, Luke, is part of this journey. He's including himself. He's a travel companion with the Apostle Paul. He's also the one writing the story out. And he mentions by name this centurion named Julius, who's in charge of Paul. Verse 2, and embarking in a ship of Andromedium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. We learned a little bit about Aristarchus earlier on. He was a continual traveling companion for the Apostle Paul. The next day we put in at Sidon. Oh yeah, I got a map here. Thank you, Kim. I got a map here that helps us a little bit. Here's Caesarea. This is where Paul was kind of witnessing or defending himself before Herod and Festus. He was in prison here for 2 years. Okay? And now they've sailed to Sidon, and then eventually they're going to make it by the end of chapter 27 to an island called Malta. Typically, to get from here to Rome would take about 5 weeks. It turns out, scholars say, it took 4 to 6 months to get from Caesarea to Rome. At the end of chapter 27, they only make it to this island of Malta. All right, so that kind of gives you an idea. Go ahead and leave this up, and then we'll look at it every once in a while. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. Apparently, Paul had friends in Sidon, so Julius says, you know what, I know how bad you want to get to Rome, and I'm the only way you're going to get there. I know you're going to come back to the ship. You can go hang out with your friends. They can give you supplies, and then you can come back when it's time to sail. And putting out to sea, verse 4, from where we sailed under the lee of Cyprus. And the word lee, it's a shelter. All right, so they're coming under the lee of Cyprus here, and there's a wind that's coming that Cyprus shelters the ship. There's a rough side of the seas on one side of the island, and then a lee side or a shelter side. They chose the shelter side because it's smoother sailing, okay? Because the winds were against us. And verse 5, and when we had sailed across the open sea, along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra and Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. About 100-footer, was carrying wheat, other cargo, along with several people. We sailed slowly, verse 7, for a number of days, and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, and as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salomne. Coasting along with it difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens. Near was the city of Lasea. Scholars and archaeologists are guessing this is where Fair Havens was. They know it's on this island, but they just don't know exactly where. There's no archaeological evidence of that. But Luke mentions this, verse 9. Since much time had passed, And the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over. Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and of the ship, but also of our lives." Now, Paul's just voicing his opinion here. Elsewhere in 2 Corinthians, it says that he knows what it's like to be shipwrecked. He's been shipwrecked 3 times. So he's been on the seas before. This is nothing new to him, and he knows that bad weather is coming. And the reason why he knows this is because he mentions the fast. It's the end of the Day of Atonement. It's a major holiday for the Jews, and the Day of Atonement was either late September or early October. And everybody knows that on this sea, during that period of time between early October through November into December, this is the time you do not want to sail, because winds come up and they can absolutely destroy a ship. This place is littered with sunken ships who tried to sail at that specific time. So it's not just that Paul has experience in sailing, but he also knows, having lived around the sea his entire life, that it gets nasty after the Day of Atonement. That's kind of a signal for bad weather coming. But the centurion, verse 11, paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And why not, right? I mean, I've got this Jewish rabbi, or I've got a pilot of this ship. Who am I going to believe? Well, I'm going to go with the pilot on this. Verse 12. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Do you see the detail that Luke is giving? He wants us to know the directionality. He wants us to know. And part of the reason is because he's writing to people in real time. He's not really writing with you and me in mind. He's writing to people who are his contemporaries, and he's saying, you all can check this out. And so I'm giving you all kinds of details to validate that this is how it went down. Verse 13. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, that word tempestuous in the Greek, it's the Greek root for typhoon. So we're not talking about a fall breeze here. We're talking about typhoon-type conditions. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Okay, we can't fight the wind. We're just going to go with it. We're going to go with the wind. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. They took up anything that was hanging in the water. They took up anything that was making them ride low so they could ride a little bit higher, because they didn't know where they were going. The wind was taking them everywhere. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, a Syrtis was just a sandy shoal that would be just under the surface, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. Cargo's making them ride lower in the water. They need to ride higher in the water in case they come across shallow shoals or a reef of some type, so they throw the cargo overboard. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have to set sail for Crete and incurred this injury and loss." Don't you love having people around that tells you what you should have done? I don't think that Paul is being a snot here. I think he's trying to earn the right to speak what he's about ready to say. I choose not to say that Saul is just kind of sticking it to the guys. You should have listened to me. But rather, he says, you need to listen to me now. You should have listened to me then, you didn't, but now you need to listen to me now. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. Well, thank you, Apostle Pollyanna. That's really great to think positively like this. But now he gives the reason, verse 23. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you." Guys, you should have listened to me a few days ago. I get it, but now you really need to listen to me. I have hope for you. God has said, I'm going to go to Rome. And I'm really glad to hear about that, but I'm even more glad because you're all going to make it too. You're going to make it out of this alive. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. Verse 27. When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land, probably because they could hear the breakers. You know, sailors, they understand differences in sounds, and they're out there. They can't see a lick. They can't see anything. They don't know where they are. They can't navigate because they used the stars back then. They have no idea where they are, but they can hear breakers in the distance. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms, which is about 120 feet. A little farther on, they took a sounding again and found that they're in 90-foot deep water. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. In that type of ship, if you were going to let an anchor out, you had to get in a small skiff and get away from the boat a few feet and then drop the anchor for whatever reason, I don't know. And so these sailors are thinking, yeah, let's do that. Hey, you know what? We're going to go out there in the bad water, and we're going to let the anchors out. And the whole idea was, let's get in these small boats and make a run for it, because this baby's going down. We're not going to go down with it. And Paul tells the centurion, unless they're with us, they're not going to make it. So the soldiers, they cut the lines to the skiffs. Verse 33, as day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Parenthetically, Luke writes, we were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Now, when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on, which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea. Let the anchors go. We don't need them. It's making us ride us too low. So they cut the anchors off, let them float down to the bottom of the sea. They also loosened the ropes on the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail and the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. The soldiers were responsible for the prisoners, and so if they were to escape, they too would suffer the death penalty. We saw that back early part in Acts when Peter was about ready to escape, and they killed the guards that let Peter and John escape early on in the book of Acts. So that was just the Roman way of doing things. All right, I'm not going to get killed, so I'm going to kill these guys, and then I'll live. But we find out something else. But the centurion, verse 43, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on the planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that we were brought safely to land. Wow, what an adventure. But again, the question is, why is this here? From chapter 1 through chapter 26, there is a gospel presentation almost every single time there's a conversation. There is someone speaking the gospel. There is someone planting a church. There is some kind of oppression. There is some kind of persecution because the apostles, Peter and Philip and John and Stephen, are insisting upon preaching the gospel, but not in chapter 27. So is Luke recording what happened in chapter 27 just because it's a cool story and he kind of wraps it up? Is that why? I don't think so. I think what we can learn here is some things about who God is and about what He's done. And I want to approach this passage and talk about storms. Because every one of us in this room are facing storms. Some of them are typhoon-like. They are absolutely overwhelming you. I had some conversations after the first service of just people who are going through the middle of storms, and they just feel like one more day of this and they're going to go down to the bottom for good. And so that happens to us. It happens to us constantly. So I think that one of the reasons why this story is here is because not even a storm, a physical storm in Paul's life can hinder the gospel going out. What God determines to have happen will happen in spite of the circumstances. And I want to turn that around and make that phenomenally encouraging to us, because no matter what, God is at work. No matter what storm you are in, God is at work in you, and He will accomplish the purposes that He sets out to accomplish through you in spite of that storm. So yeah, I'd like to take kind of a metaphorical approach to this passage and talk about this a little bit. And if you want to take some notes, you can do that. But let's talk about storms. First of all, number one on your outline, storms destroy self-reliance. Storms destroy self-reliance. Paul says, guys, I don't think we should be leaving right now. The fast is over, and that triggers a period of time, about 60 to 70 days, where you don't want to be on the water. The pilot says, hey, I'm the experienced one. You know what? For a ship's captain, you're a really good rabbi, but I am the pilot. I'm the one who knows. I've been on these waters. I've made this route thousands of times. I can do it blindfold. We'll be fine. You can hear him, right? Paul says, okay. And then all of a sudden, the ship is going down, and Paul says, yeah, you really should have listened. But now that we're completely dependent, I want you to know this: God has come to me. I think that we need to hear those sometimes in our own storms. I'm not here to play dime store therapist. But I think many times the storms that come up in our lives, whether they're our own making or if they're happening to us and they were not of our own making, I think many times it is simply to destroy that one thing in our life that keeps us from being blessed in the midst of the storm, and that is self-reliance. I wish I could say that's your story, but it's my story too. And what we see in this beautiful story, this adventurous story, are these things going on. And let's face it, in church life, there are things that God, He just leaves us scratching our head. And we don't know. One minute I'm praying for someone to get their dream job and they get it. And then the next minute I'm praying for someone because they just lost their dream job. In 1 minute I'm praying for someone, and so are you. I'm praying for someone, they go in for a biopsy, and we're praying like mad that it be benign. And the next minute, I'm praying for someone who goes in for a biopsy and it's malignant. And we don't know. We don't know why God does those things, except that we do know that many times the storms in our life, they destroy, they break down that residual effect of our sin, that self-reliance that crops up and says, I can take it from here. And God says, oh, really? I don't think you can. And the more that He breaks us down, the more we rest in Him, we can be able to cry out to Him, and He is most glorified during those moments. I think it's very important. There is a benefit in the storms of our life. They remind us that God is completely in control. That may not be good news to you, because you might be thinking, Craig, if you were only in my storm, you wouldn't say that. Well, let's listen to the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. For we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. He said, I want you to know the hell we went through. It was awful. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. We begin to think we can move on or we can die, and dying right now looks pretty favorable. We are so despaired of life, dying, that looks really good right about now. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. We were convinced we were dead. We convinced we were as good as dead. But that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. It wasn't meant. We were in the thick of it. We were in some really hellish storms, to the point where we were thinking favorably about dying, that maybe this was our moment when we would die. But what we found out is that whether we're living or we're dead, that God is this God, and that He is God of the living and He's God of the dead as well. We relied on Him. We trusted Him. In the same letter that Paul writes in chapter 12, verses 7 through 10, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me. Now, a lot of people think that thorn in the flesh was a physical ailment. I don't think it was. I don't see how a physical ailment could necessarily make Paul humble unless he was a former NBA athlete or something. I don't know, and he wasn't. I think the thorn in the flesh was a temptation that he would love for God to take away. And he knew that it was a messenger he knew that Satan, his fingerprints was all over that, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Which is a really nice way of God to say, no, I'm not going to remove it. It's going to stay there. My grace will be sufficient for you. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. There are those moments in our lives when it seems that what God is doing is punishing. And let's face it, most of us here, especially those of us who are raised in church, we live under this blanket that God is always disfavorable with us. His frown is always upon. That is not the gospel. But sometimes we think let's face it, you can get really tired of trying to be good, can't you? That sounds like a country western song. And it just wears on us, and we begin to think that whatever storm is happening in our life, it's because God's sticking it to us. No, it's not. What He's doing is He says, I want you to trust me. I want you to rely completely and solely upon me. And so think about the storm that you are in right now. I am not giving you a recipe to get out of that storm. Just like I couldn't say, you know what, Paul, I think you really, really need to pray, and then maybe God will lift the wind and you'll sail smoothly to Rome. I wouldn't even begin to do that, but in the middle of that storm, is it possible that you have been relying on yourself to solve whatever storm problem there is? And God is saying, would you quit trying to do that and trust me? Trust me in the middle of this storm. Because we're talking about the unhindered gospel going out. Do you know what can hinder the gospel in America today? The storms that we experience. My storm that I'm in right now can be so intense and so disfavorable that it completely takes me out of any kind of ministry whatsoever, because I'm zeroing in so much on the storm itself. And that hinders the gospel. That hinders us from going into mission. And so I say to myself, well, this storm is really, really bad. When it lifts, when the sailing gets smoother and easier, then I'll get back into that. Well, when exactly is that going to happen? When are all of the storms in your life going to be over? When are all the storms in my life going to be over? They never will this side of heaven. We can always find a reason why we are not being witnesses in the everyday rhythm of life. Always. And so Paul says, listen, those storms are there to destroy any self-reliance. Storms are also, number 2, they create Godward hope. They create Godward hope. And one of the ways that they create Godward hope is by letting us in. God is letting us in. That's exactly what happened with Paul. They have been on the storm, or on the sea, and they've been going back and forth, up and down, and it's just awful. It's just been awful. To the point where they don't even know where they are. They can't see the stars. They can't navigate. All they're doing is just going with the wind. That's all they're doing. They have no idea what's ahead of them. And an angel comes to Paul and says, don't be afraid. You're going to make it to Rome. And even better news, everyone's going to survive. Now, pretend for a moment that you're on the ship with Luke and Aristarchus and Paul and Julius and all the other people. You're on that ship. And you're going up and down, and you're turning green, and you're heaving overboard, and you're just overwhelmed with seasickness. You're chilled to the bone because of the waves and the wind and the rain. There's no place you can go for shelter, and you're despairing of life. You're thinking we're dead, but all of a sudden you find out that you have this assurance by God Himself that you're going to make it. Now, does that change your outlook at all? I think it does. It's the same wind. It's the same nausea. It's the same rain. It's the same cold. The circumstances have not changed at all. And yet everything has changed because of the assurance. Because God has let you in on His plan. Jesus did that in John 15. Check this out. In John chapter 15 with the disciples, no longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You know what? If you were my servants, and that's our relationship, you wouldn't know what I'm about because I don't owe you an explanation. Your job is just to do what I tell you to do. But everything has changed because I call you friends. And when I call you friends, I let you in. I let you in on the plan. Let me give you another example. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, Jesus is kind of downloading the end times. And it's very ambiguous, very mysterious words. But Jesus is telling His disciples, you know that the end is coming when? And He says this in Matthew 24. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. He said, guys, I don't even know. Don't try to do the math. Don't figure it out. I don't even know when that's going to happen. The only one who knows, the only time that the Father knows when everything's going to end is the Father. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. I can't give you a time and date, but I can give you a situation. I can give you a period of time. And He says, fellas, no time, no date, but I can give you the atmosphere of the time. It will be like during the days of Noah. Okay, all right. So we go back to Genesis chapter 6, verse 11 and 12. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. It's the days of Noah. Does that strike a familiar chord at all? You know what God has done? God in His faithfulness has let us in. He has let us in, and He's saying, you know that the time is near when the days start looking like this. The days that look like this, there is going to be a storm on every day. There is just going to be massive storms, and we're all going to be living in that time. We're in those storms. Every day there is violence, and there is lawlessness, and there is evil, and there is sin, and the people applaud it, and it's awful, and yet we are here on that ship called life, and we're going back and forth, and it seems like we're being tossed back and forth by the waves. We don't know where we are because we can't navigate, but yet all of a sudden our God in His sovereignty and His love has let us in and said, know this, in the days when my Father is going to come and make everything new, In those days, it's going to look like a humongous storm has hit. And everyone who is mine, everyone who believes in me, not a hair on your head will be lost. So as we are tossing back and forth in this day and age, and we see in the news the scandal, that scandal, this politician saying that, this politician saying that, that politician tweeting that, dig. We see it, makes us sick, but we're not lost. We are not despairing of hope, but rather our hope is Godward, because more and more as we live in this world, we find out there is zero solution for humanity. All kinds of pilots out there in the world are saying, if you follow my way, I'll help you navigate through the storm. If you follow my way or vote for me, I'll help you navigate through this storm. And God's word comes to us and says, listen, this storm is to show you that I've destroyed all self-reliance. I'm letting you in on it. I'm letting you know. But not just letting you in, but loading us up with his promises. And the way that God does that, he loads us up with promises. I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will be with you always to the ends of the age. I will complete in you this perfect work. Philippians chapter 4, Paul writes this, the Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Don't be anxious about the storms. What do I do then in the middle of the storm? What do I do about that? Through prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Tell God about it. Let your requests be made known to God. That sounds too simple because my problems are very complex. And God says, yeah, I know. It's a storm. And right now you still think that you can pilot your boat. You still think that you can get through the storm. I'm telling you, you can't. And the storm is going to keep coming until I completely destroy your self-reliance. And your hope becomes Godward and not on the latest whatever. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. That's just one promise. There are so many more promises to you, very similar to the promise that the angel gave to Paul in the ship. I'm letting you know, what God has purposed for you, God will accomplish. You can trust him. You can trust him that you will make it through this. God has this plan, and that is to drive you to make you like his son, Jesus Christ. But that still doesn't help us understand why Luke mentions this story. There were other stories of Paul that he could have mentioned. Why this? He could have said, he could have written, yeah, we set off from Caesarea, and it took us 6 months to get there, but we made it to Rome. Chapter 28. Why does he mention this? There's not a sermon. Paul's not defending himself with the gospel like he did with Felix and Festus and Herod. I think the reason why Paul is using this is because that's the reason why Luke mentions there's 276 people in the boat. That's why Paul mentions the centurion by name. His name's Julius. That's why Luke mentions that Paul broke bread and thanked God after they hadn't eaten in 2 weeks. Why? Because the gospel went out to these 276 people. Did God love Paul? Absolutely. But God loved the other 275 as well. And I'm thinking by the time that they land on Malta, or they get beached on Malta, these people knew the gospel of Jesus Christ because in the everyday rhythm of life, Paul gave them that gospel. And the same thing is true for you and me. There is one more thing that I want to hit on here, and this will probably stimulate some conversation. We have a Q&A up here afterwards. If you want to come up and ask questions, you're more than welcome to. But there is a teaching that is pervasive in our society today that is absolutely from the pit of hell. And it is this: if you're experiencing storms in life, if you're experiencing physical ailment, and you have prayed and you've asked God to alleviate those, you need to keep on praying. You don't have enough faith. If bad things are happening, if you are not experiencing your best life now, then that's on you. Imagine for a moment that Paul hears that while he's on the open seas, tossed back and forth, heaving over the side, whatever lunch he had 2 weeks prior. And someone comes up and says, Paul, fear not, you can have your best life now. I think that Paul would probably say in Aramaic, in Greek, and in Hebrew, shut up. Shut up. Paul could have said, you know, Lord, I've been whipped, I've been beaten with rods, I've been shipwrecked 2 other times, I've been stoned and left for dead, I've been drug out of cities, I've been rejected from every synagogue that I've ever stepped into just about. And now this, seriously, a storm where I'm heaving and I'm sick and I'm upset, I'm cold. Do you think that I could have had a pleasure cruise going to Rome even though I'm going as a prisoner? And I want to mention this because there is this pervasive teaching going around by very, very well-known preachers that I do not want you to listen to. Because what they're saying is a pack of lies. That whatever happening in your life, if it's bad, it's on you. You just need to pray, or you just need to believe more, or think happy thoughts, or click your heels together and recite, there's no place like home, or say this verse over and over again. And if it's not happening, then you're not believing enough. Oh, what a load of crap that is. And brothers and sisters, it is destroying all kinds of Christians throughout our land. It starts in Redding and it goes to Houston, and it's hurting people's lives. And so my encouragement to you is whatever storm you are in, I wish I could say, hey, claim these 5 principles and you'll get out of it. No, all I can say is whatever the storm, whatever it is that you are in, if it's physical, if it's spiritual, if it's social, if it's relational, if it's domestic, if it's at home, if it's vocational at work, whatever that storm is that you are in, be in it, trusting in Christ. Amen. And one of the beautiful things about a fellowship is that we want to be in that storm with you. That's what Paul calls bearing one another's burdens. We want to be there with you through that storm. My hope and my prayer is that, and Brian, you guys can come on up right now, please. We're going to sing a song, and it's a song of decision. It's one that they just taught you earlier. And we're going to sing this again. I want you to think about the lyrics and how powerful it is, because it may be that there is a decision time. You came and there is this storm raging, and in fact, it may have been all you could do to get here today. It could have been all you could do to get here today. And you're here, and now you're hearing about storms. And is it possible that this storm is raging and you are still trying to hold on and still trying to control your situation and pilot yourself and navigate yourself through that storm? Could it not be that God is saying to you right now, let the wind go. I will never leave you nor forsake you. I am taking you in a direction, and it will be for your ultimate best. And it may not be for the stated best that you think it should be, but it will be for your ultimate best. Can you trust Him with that? If that's you, I mean, right where you sit, you can be able to talk to the Lord about those things. If you want someone to pray with you, or if you have to do something physical, then certainly come to the front and kneel at the steps and be able to pray and just ask God to not just deliver you from the storm. There's nothing wrong with asking for deliverance from a storm, but also ask Him while the storm rages. May He remind you of the promises that He has given. That He will never leave you nor forsake you, that He will give you rest, that He will provide for you a peace that passes all understanding in the midst of that storm. Because that could be the very thing that's hindering the gospel from going out. So just think about that as the team leads us in this song. Sing along or not, but enjoy the lyrics and enjoy this time in the midst of your storm to trust God.
Thanks for listening to the Arcade Church podcast. Visit us at arcadechurchonline.com, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.